Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
I'm here again, Ernie Chambers, and today it might be something like a classroom session, namely going over a subject dominated by a man whom I respected since I was in high school. And the only reason I didn't respect him sooner than that, I knew nothing about him. There was a family not too far from where I lived, which was on 25th and Corby. They lived on 25th between Corby and Maple. It was the Adams family, not the one on television. And the one in the family who was around my age was Ralph. He had a number of brothers and sisters, and we all got along. Their father and mother were very interested in exposing their children to ideas and principles and good literature. So I would go by there and read from the books. One was a very thick book. You can see the space between my index finger and my thumb. It was the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. And when I began to read it, I couldn't put it down until I finished it. That doesn't mean at one sitting I read the whole thing, but I continued reading and reading until I finished it. As I read, I had to be conscious all the time of the fact that he had no typewriter. In those days, there were not even computers. So he wrote it all by hand, and he had a very legible handwriting. Frederick Douglass knew how to enter the mind of somebody who is being taught something new by remembering what it was for him. So when he explained, there was nothing put downish about it, nothing that gave the impression that this person was somehow deficient for not knowing that to which he or she had not been exposed. So it was very easy reading, very informative. And there have been numerous books written about Frederick Douglass. I have one with me, and I'm not going to read it today, but it's called Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom by a man named David Blight. This is what it looks like. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but you see it stands on its own bottom. That shows you how thick it is. Frederick Douglass was a man who fascinates, and I say in the present tense, fascinates as well as fascinated people down through the years, through the decades. He experienced slavery. His mother was victimized by a white man, and that's how Frederick was conceived. To show you how much I thought of him, I dabbled in art. I'm not an artist, I'm a drawer. And when I was in high school, this was my rendering of Frederick Douglass. I wanted to make him appear as strong as he appeared to me, almost as if he were chiseled out of stone. There are other pictures that I've drawn. Some people say they're tolerably good. Maybe so, maybe no. But what I want to do today is delve a little bit into some things pertaining to Frederick Douglass. And I hope that it will be enough to inspire some people to awaken their curiosity, to read this book, and especially his autobiography. He described from the standpoint of somebody experiencing slavery, the brutality visited upon slaves, even if one was ill, in the field, maybe vomiting. You know how they would treat him? They might kick him, they might lash him. And when Frederick would wonder, and everybody, even today, would wonder, why would they do that? Slaveholders believed in making lessons, making examples. If you Don't do what you should do. And even if you fall ill, this will happen to you. There were slaves who escaped, and they didn't have anesthetic in those days, anesthesia. But even if they had, they wouldn't have used it. Slaves saw other slaves having feet chopped off or sawed off, again, to make an example. This was being done by these white Christians. This is the information that the people who are opposed to what they call critical race theory, they don't want these things taught. They said this undermines all of the finest principles of America. But this is what America was about. It's what America is about today. And as these white people become more and more armed in terms of numbers and higher powered weapons, some are going to try to take America back to where they and former President Donald Trump felt represented when America was great. In other words, virtual, in some cases, slavery for Black people, real slavery for Black people. Right now, especially in the South, there are Black men in prison on trumped up charges, and they work in these fields for private individuals. Virtual slavery in the United States of America, where they talk about liberty and justice for all. If any white person with even a modicum of education and intelligence has to wonder why I feel the bitterness that I feel, he or she needs to get some psychiatric help. I will not go into all of those things because I want to deal with Frederick Douglass. Whenever a book is written, there is what's called a dust jacket, and there is a leaf inside where they do a little bit of commentating about what's in the book. And this is what is on that page in this book. Frederick Douglass was the most important African-American of the 19th century and one of the most significant writers and orators in American history. David Blight's long-awaited authoritative biography of this great American is based in part on papers never seen by previous biographers. Douglass, and he has two S's at the end of his name. Douglass was born a slave and escaped at the age of 20. He was fortunate to have learned to read as a boy, and he would develop his skill forbidden to slaves to become one of the great writers of his era. But first, he would make his reputation as the most celebrated orator of the abolition movement. He could write, he could speak with great power and clarity. Drawing on personal experiences, including his dramatic escape, he developed a genius with words and held audiences spellbound for hours. And speaking of words, he inspired me. So I wrote a little rhyme. See, I'm not a poet, I'm a rhymester. Some people call it poetry. I call it rhymes. This is what I was inspired to write when I went through some of Frederick's book. He thought great thoughts, but lacked the words to give them tongue and sway. Meteor-like, they flashed through his mind, then meteor-like died away. Reading great words written by others helped him to understand. Finally, the power of those words he too did command. When words did give tongue to thoughts, a battle had been won. Thoughts no more were transient things, but permanent like the sun. Words can be embalmed in books. Thoughts can be embalmed in words. There is a substance that's formed from the sap that comes out of trees. And in prehistoric times, there might be an unfortunate insect who would be encased in this. When it hardened in years past, it became known as amber. So there are creatures embedded in amber, just like they would have been the day that that first happened. There are thoughts embedded in words, trapped by words. Words have power. Words have power to kill. They have power to heal. They can lacerate, cut, slash, and tear. They can make a person feel that his or her heart is being snatched out of the body. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, find somebody mourning for a loved one lost, about whom they are still feeling attachment, and start ridiculing that person, laughing at that person, undermining that person, taking away that person's humanity. And the one who is going through this misery will feel that you're ripping his or her heart out. Words are powerful. And I've stated on numerous occasions that a loaded brain is more powerful than a loaded weapon. Words may make it possible, if you're confronting somebody with a loaded weapon, to lay that pistol down, babe, lay that pistol down. If you can engage another person's mind, take that person back to a point where his or her fundamental basic humanity is slumbering, you may be able to awaken something. Don't throw anybody away. Nobody who is grown may be as hateful as Satan is supposed to be, but nobody is born that way. Experiences, teaching, misteaching, shape, mold, and bring people to the point where they can either be considered a saint like Mother Teresa, or the next thing to Satan like Adolf Hitler. But if you put Mother Teresa over here as a bouncing baby girl and Adolf Hitler over there as a bouncing baby boy, it wouldn't be hard to feel an urge to pick up and cuddle either or both of them. But as they go through life, things happen. They learn things. They mislearn things. And two people having the same situation presented to them may react in opposite ways because of what they bring to that situation. There are influences that impact us all of our life, every day of our life. And if those experiences can alter a person and make him or her into a monster, counter experiences can reclaim that person. But sometimes people in those situations need help. This is when, if there is such a thing as this compassion that they talk about in religion, this is a time when it should burst into full flower. And you should not see that person as he or she is at that instant, but think of that person before he or she became that, based on what that person experienced. And if it once was that good thing, perhaps some of that can be regained. But you have to make that person think well of himself or herself and practice what Whitney Houston sang about. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. If there's somebody you love, you're not going to degrade, demean, or mistreat that person. You're not going to stand by quietly and without protesting or even physically intervening if somebody else tries to harm that one you love. Learn to love yourself. People will value you as you value yourself. Now, that's all the preaching. I'm going to go back to Frederick Douglass, but his words, remember, I never heard his voice. I never saw him walking. The words on paper had power to vice my mind to this very day. But to continue, Frederick Douglass, drawing on personal experiences, including his dramatic escape, let him develop a genius with words and held audiences spellbound for hours. He knew his Bible and, like Jeremiah, warned his nation about the moral corruption of slavery. But like the people who laughed at Moses, there was mockery, there was opposition, and slavery flourished. Over his lifetime, he wrote 3 versions of his autobiography, all of which are classics of the slave narrative and of American memoir. He also edited 2 newspapers and mastered the short form political essay. This is a former slave. When he was in Baltimore growing up, a little slave kid, he was sent on errands. There were little white boys who went to school and knew how to read. And at first they laughed at Fred because he didn't understand what words were or letters. And these little boys weren't conversant with the devastation of slavery. Frederick was just another kid to them. Do you know they helped teach him how to read? It wasn't just this so-called kind mistress. These little white boys helped him learn how to read. You know why it was so effective? They were not so far away from the point when they couldn't read, and they know what helped them most to learn how to read. And they took that knowledge that they had and helped Frederick Douglass learn his letters. Makes me wonder why these people who go to schools of teaching, education colleges, say that they can't teach children how to read. But these little boys who were still in grade school knew how to teach somebody who didn't know how to read, how to read. You need to put things together. As the Bible says, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. You pick things up if you're attentive and pay attention. Somebody who is a landscape artist will look at a scene and be able to see beauty, contrasts, and paint a beautiful landscape. Somebody else would only see trees, and when fall comes, the leaves are going to fall and they're going to have to rake them up. They see flowers that are going to crinkle up and die, and they're not pretty anymore. You take from something a lot of times what you bring to it. Somebody who is like me and like you will pull out a dollar bill and use it to pay for what we're going to get. Somebody else may look at it and see how things are engraved or etched or whatever term you want to use to describe how this money is printed. They'll see individual dots put together that form images. Once again, it's what they bring to it. The example that many people have heard is that of an elephant. Several blind people were introduced to an elephant, and they were not told anything about it except that it was a living creature. Well, one felt the trunk, another one felt the tusks, another one felt those huge things we would call toenails, another one pulled that little tail. And when they in their way of expressing themselves, described this creature, you wouldn't have known they were talking about the same animal because no one of them was able to see the entire animal. When we come to a situation and we don't see it all, we run away with misinformation, false notions. People can tell us any crazy thing we buy, and that brings me to the pandemic, COVID-19. Crazy, ignorant Black people. You don't often hear me say that about my kind and my people. But anybody who brings harm to those who are a part of mine, I take umbrage at. I wouldn't kill them, I wouldn't hurt them, but I'm disgusted by them. And some who do it out of ignorance, I'm sympathetic, but they need to overcome that ignorance. Make these statements that I'm not going to get a vaccination. I don't want to put that stuff in my body, where you put the stuff in your mouth, chew it and swallow it, that you get in the supermarket. Various antibiotics are used in these animals. Various chemicals are used in treating and curing these products, and you consume them. You consume products with refined sugar. You consume products with way too much salt, and these things will slowly kill you. And you ingest it every day. And then you say you're not going to take harmful things into your body. And you say that because you heard somebody give you a cock and bull story that you accept. I've gotten both of my Moderna vaccinations, and I'm going to get a booster shot. A few days ago, I got my flu shot. And in a couple of days more, I'm going to get my pneumonia shot, not that give pneumonia, that fight those things. See how the usage of words can mislead? But if you're talking to people who understand the language, they fill in what you mean because they know what you mean. That's the way thoughts are expressed. And I'm going to get my Moderna booster shot, as I said. I'm 84 years old, and I could drop down right now and do 30 push-ups and not even be breathing hard. Not to impress people do I do this. I want to stay around here for a while. I do this for me. But when I see people who are not well educated, being misled, made to feel that that which could save their life will harm them, it troubles me deeply. And I have to say, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Then, as Jeremiah, the crybaby prophet, said, and you've heard me say these things before, oh, that my head were waters and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for the daughters of my people, for the people, the children of my daughters. I'm not one of those who will take pleasure when somebody who said that the vaccine was harmful comes down with COVID-19 and say that's what they deserve. Nobody deserves that. What bothers me is that there are others they may have infected, their own children, other family members who are elderly, and are so stupid, they think that there are chips hidden in this vaccine, and when they get the shot, those chips make it possible for their movements to be monitored. Have you ever heard such a silly thing in your life? That there are people risking their and others' lives because they believe this stuff. But let me go on about Frederick Douglass. You see what talking about Frederick Douglass causes me to do? Frederick, why don't you do like a dead man and just be dead and leave me alone? What? See, now I'll be as crazy as some of you all. Act like I'm listening to somebody whose picture's on a book talk to me. But the written word will speak to you if your mind is open. And I know I've lost a lot of people taking this approach. It's not what they bargained for. Well, that often happens. The former slave met with Lincoln in the White House and rejoiced in the victory of emancipation. Let me tell you something else that happened with Frederick Douglass. He was a very imposing man and in appearance, striking. There was some kind of commemorative ceremony going on at the White House, and Frederick Douglass had been invited by Lincoln. And Frederick Douglass was in this room that could be called a study. But anyway, the lighting was not like it is now. Obviously, they didn't have electric lights. So there were shadows in the room, and Douglass was sitting on this couch. A journalist came in and he saw him and he walked over to him. And the way he described it, the meeting, he said, I entered this room shrouded in shadow, and I saw this imposing man with the impressive visage. That's what they call faces then. And I didn't realize that I would be fortunate enough to be in the presence of the president, unguarded, and he didn't seem in the least bit troubled by my presence. So I walked over and I extended my hand and said, Mr. President, it's a pleasure to meet you. And the response shocked me. The gentleman said, I'm not the president. My name is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass on occasion was mistaken for President Lincoln. So I guess there must have been in real life a resemblance. You all hadn't heard such things? I got this from the collected works of Abraham Lincoln. I read things. I believe in documentation and offering it if people will accept it. But my job is not to make people believe. And I wander when I talk. People ask me, what do I use for a model for my life? And I could give any number of things, but if we're in Lincoln, I say, that man up on the Capitol known as the sower, that's the way I look at the way I live and what I do. He's got that sack of seeds and his hand is back. He's ready to spread them. I said, all the sower does is throw the seed out there. There are other forces that come into play that determine whether they take root or not. So what I do is speak when I have the opportunity. And I don't know whether people will accept it or reject it. But my job, as I reckon my job, is to say under those circumstances what I think needs to be said the best way that I can. Maybe people will mock and scoff and even walk out, but somebody else may hear it and take exactly what I said, but not be a person who generates a negative response upon being met and say the same thing, and people will sit back and be taught. Those are the other forces that I have no control over. I put the seed out there, maybe it will take root, maybe not. So that's what I will do. And it's not up to me to make anybody change his or her mind. If I can't change their mind, fine. I'm not going to get angry at them, just like I don't want them to get angry with me because I don't accept their foolishness. And they say, well, yours is foolishness too. And I say, well, based on your education, I can see where you would readily think what I'm saying is foolish. But water cannot rise above its level. So what kind of fool would I be to curse water because it's wet? What kind of fool and how unreasonable would I be to get angry at you because for whatever reason, you believe what you claim that you believe? And I say claim because not always when somebody speaks is he or she saying honestly what he or she believes. It's what he or she thinks the person they're talking to wants them to say or ought to hear, or will want that person to view them in a certain light. That, when people are misdefining or misdescribing or mislabeling a creature, we'll say that's a chameleon. A chameleon doesn't change into different colors. There are scales it has, which if they face one direction, will give a color. If they face a different direction, they give a different color. But the purpose is not to imitate a rainbow, but to be a protective mechanism. Nature tries to equip her children with the means to survive in a hostile environment, from the smallest microbe, from the smallest creature with legs or wings, to the largest living thing. The means to survive will be incorporated into that species. And you say into the species rather than every individual, because not every individual will survive. Nature is interested in the species surviving. So if something happens and it's killing off a lot of the individuals, nature has put into that species adaptability so that some of the members will develop a defense against that which is killing, and they will survive. And the survivors, because that adaptation goes to the genetic level, will pass that protection on to its offspring and its offspring and so forth. But the only adaptation that can be passed on is one that affects the genes. George Bernard Shaw was trying to make this clear. So he said there were these scientists who didn't understand, and they were going to see if they could disprove what Charles Darwin said, and other scientists who had sense enough to recognize adaptability. They would take this mouse, chop its tail off. Take the descendants of that mouse, chop its tail off. And after they went through several generations of mice chopping the tails off, and they said, aha, the mouse's tail still grows. So evolution can't be true. And that's because they didn't understand the principle. Without getting into something as complex as evolution, try to understand that people cannot know more than what they know. Am I saying it does not irritate me when people who ought to know better will not do better? Well, can't you detect the irritation I'm experiencing when I'm discussing these people who are accepting this cock and bull stuff about the anti-COVID vaccines? Why will I express those sentiments when I've just said water cannot rise above its level? I do not have a person sitting here across the table from me or standing beside me, and I'm chastising that person or dressing down that person, as it's called. I'm trying to fulfill the role of a teacher. There are certain principles which have validity, and if they're properly packaged and presented, there are some people who will accept that and benefit from it. But the one who always wants to catch somebody in my words, and that's what Jesus was up against all the time. Not that I'm like Jesus, and I certainly hope I don't meet the same fate. but they always tried to catch him in his words, was the way they expressed it. Show where there's a contradiction or some such thing. So Jesus would hold his own, and he would never flare up based on what we see. But Jesus had a temper. And when he came into the temple, and those hypocrites, like you got them today, preachers running around here, all kind of religions, turned it into a stock exchange, not where you selling stock, a stockyard in miniature. And Jesus looked at this and he said, "You're selling animals in my Father's house? You're exchanging money?" And somewhere he got a whip. Jesus might have known a little kung fu. And one of these guys had a whip that he was driving the animals with. And since Jesus was dealing with those who had put themselves on the level with an animal, he just went over and did a little kung fu and got that whip. And he drove the money changers and the animals out. Some of the animals ran faster than the humans. Some of the humans ran faster than the animals. And Jesus just stood there on the door, on the step, and said, "My Father's house is to be called of all nations a house of prayer, and you have made it a den of thieves." That was Jesus, the gentle Jesus that they show us. But there are people who will try to take something over here and mold it and shape it so that they can use it for their purposes to trick somebody over there. That's why you have these tricksters on television with all these super churches, and they always ask for money, always ask for money. Well, Jesus told them, "You ask and it shall be given you." And the preacher looked at Jesus, he said, "But you didn't say who to ask. I got to ask those who got it." And so they get in a conversation, and some of y'all have heard me say this. Some people liked what Jesse James did, and they wanted to make him a hero. So they would say one thing: Jesse never robbed no poor people. He's like Robin Hood. He robs the rich. So one guy went to Jesse, wanted to go to the horse's mouth and hear the horse whinny for itself or speak. It was like Mr. Ed, the talking horse on television. And he said, "Jesse, there's some stuff going around here about you robbing these people and you robbing that train, you robbed this bank." And they got different explanations of why you don't rob poor people. Now you grow up poor. Well, they say growed. You growed up poor. That's why you don't rob that's why you don't rob poor people. And Jesse said, "Look, fool, growing up poor taught me something. You know why I don't rob poor people? Because when I was growing up, I learned that poor people ain't got no money. Now you let them get some money, but then they ain't poor no more, are they? That's why Jesse doesn't rob poor people." Sometimes you need to look below the surface. And you thought I lost my way because I'm 84 years old and that I'm rambling and lost the point that I was going to make. I was talking about teaching, being like a sower. Some will receive it, others won't. And that I wouldn't get angry because somebody's not going to accept what I say. And Jesus put it this way, because his disciples didn't always understand what Jesus was trying to teach them. He said, "If they will not accept Moses and the prophets, they will not accept this from one, though he came back from the dead." Some people will not accept it if somebody came back from the dead and told them. So if that person is foolish in your mind for not accepting it, how foolish are you to beat your head against a stone wall and think you're going to make it soft or you're going to make it intelligent? I used to tell them on the floor of the legislature, that I don't argue race with white people. They don't know enough about history to argue with me about anything. If I argued with them about this, it's like two drunks arguing under a street light on the corner in the middle of the night. It would be like Einstein arguing differential equations with somebody who doesn't know how to do short division. You have to learn how and when to use what it is you have to offer. Maybe what I'm doing here would be seen by some as a waste of time. Is time wasted because what I say is not accepted by people? Obviously, I don't think it's wasted, or I wouldn't do it. What I say goes to those for whom it is intended. I don't know who those people are. Somebody could have developed an ability to look deeply interested in what is being said, taking in every word. But if you could chop the top off the head and take that brain out and look at what's going on, he might be thinking about Marilyn Monroe. He might be thinking about what he's going to do when he goes to the casino. Or he might be like this guy who the priest always saw standing by a fence post every day. The priest would go by and this guy leaning against the fence post. And so one day the priest couldn't take it anymore. He said, "My good man, I've passed by here many mornings. I'm sure you've seen me. I always see you here. What are you doing here?" The fellow looked at the priest. He said, "Father, I'm thinking." And the priest said, "Well, what are you thinking about?" He said, "Mostly nothing." Leave some things and some people alone. Now, I said I was going to talk about Frederick Douglass, and I did, but I didn't say everything about him that I have to say or read everything that Frederick read. But I have something here in the way of another little rhyme, and it's called, I wrote this a long time ago, Musings about Slavery by Slaveholders. George Washington, president. Thomas Jefferson, a president. James Madison, Andrew Jackson, James Monroe, all presidents, musing about slavery. Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury. Patrick Henry, the great patriot, give me liberty or give me death. Francis Scott Key, who wrote the words to y'all's national anthem, the land of the free and the home of the brave. John Hancock, who signed his name larger than anybody on the Declaration of Independence, and his family amassed a huge fortune from smuggling slaves. You've heard me say this before, but there's some who didn't. Then that Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, the Roman Catholic, Roger B. Taney. Black men have no rights, which a white man is bound to respect. And this is all those guys together. And they won't be in that place where they say there are things flapping around with wings and playing harps and eating honey and walking streets of gold. There'll be some place where they don't have to wear any coats. And everybody is given a pair of asbestos trousers, if you get my drift. This is what these slaveholders are saying. Let us sing a psalm of praise for long gone happy-go-lucky days when Black people were in slavery. Let us smile as we recall how bent and stooped became the tall. All our slaveries had such manly bravery. Our old slaver was a saint, working slaves from kin to caint, dulling useless minds and dimming eyesight. Kin see at the break of dawn, can't see when all light has gone down the dark, deep throat of cold, cold night. Full employment, snow or rain, broiling sun and muscle strain. 'Twas a quaint life, lacking any equal. Ticks, mosquitoes, gnats, fleas, flies, sucking blood from brains and eyes. Ah, if there could only be a sequel. This is slaveholders lamenting some things about slavery, happy about others. Raging anger of the heart, all but tore slave minds apart, never knew they any inner quiet. Choking dust, foot shredding stones, meager flesh on hungry bones. Lucky slaves, they need not ever diet. Extraordinary noise sometimes welled from young slave boys. Good with evil often in them clashes. Holy God made slavers know how to make that evil go, drawn from bleeding backs by many lashes. Slavery was good for all, for big holders and the small. Greatly did the lucrative system please us. When one rightly reads the Bible, it is clear no master's liable, for all 'twas done in the holy name of Jesus. See, the slave didn't view slavery the same way the slaveholder viewed it. These men were married, they were Christians. When they forced themselves on these enslaved Black women, they were adulterers, they were rapists, they were traffickers in human flesh. You all didn't know I was going to read you some rhymes that I wrote, did you? Well, I got another one. So you might want to turn this off because you're tired now. But for those who've hung around and may want something to laugh at, here's a tale the slaves did tell. The old ones swear it's true. Sitting around the fire one night, they told me, I'll tell you. Once the president dropped by, old master fed him well, plied him with the finest wine, then bade him set a spell. Then he ordered old slaves in and made them dance and sing. Though for president's delight, they hated much this thing. White folks in those days, you see, had morals pushing zero. Never could a man who owned a slave be that slave's hero. Long old master made them dance until with sweat they glistened. Then he yelled, "Oh, Mose, come sit with us." The prez, he sat and listened. Shuffled Mose with eyes downcast, the other slaves grew still, knowing as they did old Marsh, for sport, old Mose could kill. Any man who owned a slave, a child, a man, a woman, under law could beat, rape, kill, for slaves were less than human. Sit down, have yourself some wine. Old master gave a wink to the president who smiled. Mose whispered, I don't drink. You don't drink? Don't lie to me. Old master, tipsy roared. You gonna drink this wine, you scamp? A cup of wine he poured. Mose across the table sat. The other slaves assembled in a fearful huddled mass. Some wept as old Mose trembled. Would old master fetch the whip and flay the old man's back? White folks treated slaves like dirt, for dirt you were if black. At that point, the president spoke up and said, fine, fine. You're quite lucky if you've got a slave who shuns the wine. That's a grand trait in a slave. Let's see what else he knows. Lift your head and look at me, the president ordered Mose. I have got slaves of my own, and some for freedom yearn. Black folks, though, have lesser brains, some things they cannot learn. Being free is white man's work. You black folk, Mose would find, Freedom's load is just too much for Black folks' slender mind. Take yourself an old man. The president's tone was mild. Though you've lived a good long time, you yet are like a child. Things we white men understand are things you'll never know. Knowledge needs a white man's brain to flourish and to grow. Gulping from his glass of wine, the president drank deep, smacked his lips as eyes tinged red, and foam on lips did creep. God has placed your master there to meet your needs, and you, like sweet children, must obey and do as he says do. Here old master's head did nod, but silence did he keep. See, when nodded, it could mean like this, or it could mean like this. Here old master's head did nod, but silence did he keep. Did that nod mean he agreed, or was he fighting sleep? Look, Mose, grinned the president, you squat there, I'll sit here. Laugh with me a little bit. There's nothing you need to fear. Wine had soaked the prez's brain. Away his sense had run. Mose, that poor old trembling Mose, would be the prez's fun. Yes, this night the presidential frock was frayed and faded by the little man inside, the office he degraded. He would have great sport, no doubt. Old Mose still hung his head. See here, Mose, with slurring tongue, the mighty president said. Tell what separates a fool from a black man if you're able. Softly whispered Mose, great sir, this table, only this table. Sometimes wise ones play the fool, and sometimes fools the wise. Sometimes from a low estate does dignity arise. Though the president was best, and old Mose deemed the worst, when the cards turned, first was last, and last became the first. When the slaves their own tale tell, and to their own song sing, things take on a different slant and have a different ring. White folks cannot get it right. They never truly see it. Only they can know full truth who in their life must be it. That's why when you have these white people running around here talking about they understand black people and some of their best friends were black, right there, they drop their money purse. Will things in America ever get better? I'm not a fortune teller, but they certainly can get worse. No matter how bad things are in America, for Black people, they can always get worse. Some people are very distressed because in Virginia yesterday, a racist Republican, won the governorship over a Democrat. He scared all these white people saying, you cannot have this, whatchamacallit, being taught in schools. What he meant was critical race theory. He didn't want white children taught the truth about what happened in this country and the carryover to these very days. But there are young white people who have read history and they have not bought into it. And they write books, they join demonstrations, they go to these conferences, and they do what they can. And you know what happens? They get their feelings hurt. Some of them thought that if one of their own kind explained Black people to these white people would accept it. First of all, white people cannot explain Black people. But what the white person is trying to do is transmit to them the change that came over him or her when he or she studied and saw what really is happening. But these young white people are going to have to remember that they themselves were once in a position of these they're trying to persuade to change. They do the right thing by going to their own and spending that time with them. I don't have that time to waste. I have to spend time trying to help open our eyes, to sensitize us to those things that are harmful to us. We will shun them, and to embrace those things that will help us. Everything that will help us, the white people put down and condemn. Everything that will harm us, they encourage us to get it. White people are the ones who tell us we should not get vaccinated against COVID. Then when we come down with it, we suddenly see the light, and we become those dead whom people will not believe. Because some of these people who survived because they were put on a ventilator, oxygen was forced into their lungs, the exchange couldn't be made, and the oxygen would go into their bloodstream and they would maintain life. One guy said he had died or been in a state that would be considered dead 3 times. So he fulfills what Jesus said. He came back not from the dead, but came back from 3 times dead to tell them, this is something you don't want. This is a place you don't want to be. And they ignore it. Jesus did tell the truth. Jesus had no need that anybody testify to him of man, for he knew what was in man. That's what the Bible says. And he said, as I quoted to you, sometimes I use paraphrase, but I don't change the sense of it. They will not believe though one returns from the dead to tell them. He gave a parable of Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus ate the scraps that fell off the rich man's table, fought the dogs for him. And some people said, the one dog in the Bible got a name. You know what his name was? And people say, what are you talking about? His name is Moreover. And people say, moreover, what are you talking about, fool? He said, well, don't you read the Bible? The Bible says that Lazarus down there on the floor, and moreover, the dog licked his sores. So that's the dog name. Moreover, the dog licked his sores. The one dog in the Bible with a name is named Moreover. But anyway, that's how people misread, misstate, misapply. But Jesus said that that Lazarus died and went to Abraham's bosom. That doesn't mean anything to me that I'm interested in experiencing. The rich man went to hell, and he lifted up his eyes to heaven. And the man who mocked Lazarus and let him eat the scraps off the table that he had to fight more over the dog to try to get, and said, I've got brothers. Let Lazarus dip the tip of his finger in the water and put it on my parched tongue. Let me go back and tell my brothers so they will not come to this place. There are all kinds of efforts that people who deal in moral suasion or persuasion that will be employed to try to bring light to people who are dwelling in intellectual, moral, ethical darkness. They use metaphors, they use similes, they use analogies, they use parables, they use fables. All of these are different. You can call them tricks of literary nature, designed to bring a point to minds that otherwise would not accept them. So there's a popular song out now, and it says, life is a highway, going my way all night long. You go your way, I go my way all night long. Well, life is not a highway, but people know what a highway is. So if you can get them to draw a parallel between what a highway is and what you're trying to tell them about life, going from this point to that point, then you've made progress with that person. Jesus used parables all the time. Some people accepted them, others didn't. His disciples often did not know or understand what Jesus was talking about. When he worked miracles, all they saw was the power. When he drove out demons, they saw power. That's what they wanted. They wanted the flash, the glamour, the glitz. But Jesus was using that to get to something else. And they would come to Jesus and ask him to bring fire down on the heads of these people because they won't believe. And Jesus said, other sheep I have that are not of this fold. A fold, F-O-L-D, was a term that described a place where sheep were kept. So there's not just this one place because there are sheep other places. And some sheep will not come here, but they'll go to the equivalent over there. They may not like Peter. He's big, he's brash, he's loud. He won't listen to nobody, but he knows everything. Worse than a bull in a china shop, that's Peter. Then you got others with their failings. But here's one failing they all had. Then I'm going to terminate this. Jesus, after all that time he spent with these fools, trying to enlighten them, they saw, let's say everything that the Bible says about Jesus was factual, that he actually walked on water, not when it was frozen into ice, not wearing water skis, but walked like you and I would walk on the water without sinking. Say that he turned water into wine. Say he fed thousands of people with a few fish and loaves of bread. Say all that was true. Well, his disciples saw it all. They saw him raise a little girl who was dead, graveyard dead. They saw him heal people. They even saw a centurion, a non-believer, a Roman, come to Jesus who had seen Jesus in operation. Now, the disciples who are with him all the time don't get it, but the centurion saw it right away. The centurion said, now, I don't know what to call you. I don't know what I have to believe, but I know you make people well. I want you to come to my house with me and heal my servant. Jesus said, no, he didn't. See, I got y'all. That's not what the centurion said. Jesus spoke, and Jesus offered to come to the man's house. And you know what that centurion said? He said, no, you don't have to come to my house. You have an authority. I am a man with authority. I say to this one, come, and he comes. I say to that one, go, and he goes. You don't need to come to my house. You just give the word and the job will be done. And Jesus marveled and said, I have not found such faith in all of Israel. Here was a man who did not walk with Jesus, who believed his eyes. Here are the disciples who saw what Jesus did and didn't get it. And when Jesus told them, my hour is coming and I'll be alone and all of you will leave me. And Peter said, they might leave you, but not me. This is Peter, the rock. Peter means rock. This is the rock. I'm Rocky the First. I won't leave you. So Jesus, he's not going to try to reason with a fool. He knew the truth. Peter didn't. Some people have to be shown. So when time came for Jesus's hour, all of the disciples fled. Judas betrayed him. Peter denied him. All the others deserted him. And there he was, all alone, but not too far away were the women. You all need to read that book with a different set of eyes and a different understanding and learn how to apply it. Make it literal if you want to. or make it symbolic to teach you how you ought to live and how you ought to treat each other. And some people didn't have time for long lectures, so they came to Jesus and said, I want you to put all this in a nutshell. And Jesus had a sense of humor. He said, oh, so you want me to put it in your head, huh? He said, oh, come on, Jesus, I know you do stand-up comedy, but today I want you to settle down and be serious with me. I don't have a lot of time. I got to go back to work. But before I go to work, I want you to tell me, what's the greatest commandment? Then Jesus got serious because the man asked a serious question. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. And he saw the guy shaping his mouth, but before he could get it out, because Jesus knew he had to get back to work and he'd be fired if he didn't, Jesus said, and the second one is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is all the law and the prophets. All the 10 commandments Moses brought down from Sinai. All of the little subdivisions these prophets and teachers and others have created from those 10 provisions. It all boils down to those 2 things I gave you. And if you accept them, there's nothing else you need if you want to avoid that place where the rich man wound up and go to the place where Lazarus went. And now that I've lectured you all, now that I have instructed you all, now that I've bored you all with my rhymes, it's time for me, as I always say, as the canary said when he found out the door to his cage was left open, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.